like that. From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Case. And it's great to be with you again. Got a little bonus episode for you this time to kind of fill a gap while I'm working on some other longer conversations with some admissions deans and directors from some medical schools. I have one in the bank right now that I'm kind of wrapping up with the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and then scheduled over the next few weeks, I'm going to be speaking with some people at Tulane School of Medicine and the Ohio University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and then the Dean of Admissions at the Oregon Health and Sciences University. So some really good conversations coming up in the next few weeks. So give me a little bit of time and I'll get those out to you. In the meantime, I want to bring a very popular topic that comes up at this time of year about update letters. So I tapped one of my good friends and advisor, Kate Fukawa-Connelly from Princeton, and who's very well versed in this topic and advising her students about update letters, what to put in them, when to send them, letters of interest versus letters of intent. We get into all this stuff with her. So let me tell you a little bit about Kate. Kate Fukawa-Connelly is the Director of Health Professions Advising at Princeton University. She has spent her entire career in higher education, starting in residence life during graduate school. She moved into academic advising and pre-health advising at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 2003. She's also worked in a TRIOS student support services program, supporting first-generation and low-income college goers as well. Kate is passionate about information sharing and collaboration among advisors, and she currently serves as the Director of Communications for the National Association of Advisors for Health Professions, or NAAHP. You'll hear us mention that a couple times during our conversation. She helps to develop and share resources for advisors and students in that role. Outside of work, Kate is an avid musical theater fan and a competitive, and I mean competitive, Scrabble player. She embraced the pandemic life changes by adopting 2 dogs. She's been knitting a lot, and she converted a cargo van into a camper for a socially distanced cross-country road trip this past winter break. So she's a really fun and cool person. I'm really thrilled to have her. So, hey, let's just jump right into it here with my conversation with Kate Fukawa-Connelly about update letters. Enjoy. Hey, Kate, it's nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. This has become kind of a bit of an advisor's corner edition.
I love it. I'm excited to be here. I've been a longtime fan of your podcast.
We've known each other for a long time now.
A while now.
Remember we went to dinner in San Francisco, like a group of us?
Back in the day, in the before times.
I know. So it seems like just yesterday, actually.
I think you're the most recent med school that I've gotten to visit too. So thank you for hosting me.
It was like in 2019, shortly after we moved in. Yeah, not too long after that. I've found in hearing from people that listen to this podcast that a lot of our listeners don't have access or consistent access to an advisor. And so I'd like to bring in advising voices so they don't always hear from me or from admissions people, but they hear what are advisors telling their students. And so I'm really grateful that you could join me today to talk about the letters of update letters or letters of interest and letters of intent. So that's what I want to kind of get into. And this kind of came from a few weeks ago. There was a thread there. So the NAHP, which is the advisors community, is a listserv, and the topic of letters, update letters came up, and it was kind of very long and kind of exploded. So all these advisors were chiming in. And so Kate gave this very eloquent and comprehensive post of what she shares with her advisees. And so I was like, this is an episode. So I reached out to you and you were so nice to say, let's do this. So I'm thrilled to have you here. So let me set the stage really quickly. So in about mid-April, and it's about mid-April right now. And soon those who have acceptance offers, if they have multiple offers starting on April 30th, they can hold just one. And they're allowed to stay on wait lists after that if they're in like the plan to enroll status. But I don't want to get into the choose your med school tools status stuff right now. But there are also applicants who had interviews but they may have not gotten that acceptance offer just yet. So usually for medical schools, usually waitlist movement starts to begin around the end of April, and then kind of into that first week of May, the dust really kicks up. So what happens usually is most medical schools will slightly overbook their classes, and then we start to see what we call kind of a melt occur, and that kind of brings us down to our target class, target level or below, which makes us want to go to our wait list. So that's why these letters of interest and update letters come into play. So it's oftentimes in March and April that medical schools start to hear from applicants on the wait list and wanting to express their continued interest. So that's why, Kate, that's why you're here. So I want to start off with so what do you start? How's the conversation go when you're sitting down with your advisees and they say, Kate, I want to send an update letter to X School of Medicine. How does that conversation go? First of all, is it necessary?
Sure. So I have a lot of conversations. Ideally, you've been talking to your pre-health advisor throughout the application pool. So they have a sense of where you're accepted, where you're waitlisted, what your favorite schools are. So I often already have a sense of kind of what students are interested in. Some of them have already been sending updates throughout the season. Some of them don't send anything throughout the whole application year and just let things fall as they will. I think during waitlist season, especially if you don't hold an acceptance yet, you might be getting to that point where what else can I do? Is there one more thing that I can do? So an update letter really is that one thing that you can do that just gives the school a little bit more about yourself that you might not have been able to share at the interview, or that maybe you interviewed in November and you have a number of months at this point where you've continued to do stuff. It's not like you're just sitting at home watching TV waiting for a call. You're working, you're volunteering, maybe you're taking classes. So this is a chance, if you haven't been chatting with the school, to share all of that you've learned and done and how you've reflected on that school and why you're interested in a quick, concise, professional email to that school.
What about, so this year has been very unusual. Are you advising students differently this year when it comes to these update letters?
Yeah, so I think this year schools have had a little bit harder time understanding the level of enthusiasm applicants might have because everyone's two-dimensional, so you don't get the same kind of body language. Fewer students are turning down interviews, so often once you get to January, February, folks have some offers. They might decide not to spend those $1,000 to travel to a school. But when you can just sit at your computer for a few hours and knock out one more interview, why not? Just do it and give yourself that opportunity. So whereas some schools could tell in past years, okay, we kind of know who's really interested because those folks did those interviews late into the season. Now they don't know if a late interview already has a bunch of acceptances and they're just, sitting in front of their computer for one more. So I think admissions folks are also less sure how the pandemic will affect students' decisions. I know last year, some students chose to stay closer to home, and will that come into play again this year? So providing a little bit more information about your level of enthusiasm could help them just better understand where you are in your motivations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been such a wacky year for admissions. And you're exactly right. Like we saw far fewer cancellations later in the season. I think because of the convenience and the financial implications there, like you said, like it's just easy to knock one out and have that as another option. But like last year, like you said, we saw more, we at least at Case Western saw more regional kind of demographics in our incoming class. And this year, I have to believe that there are going to be some applicants who are choosing a medical school sight unseen. If they have just one and they didn't actually visit there and they still can't travel or something. So it's really an unusual situation right now. So a lot of us are just, we can't rely on historical data like we normally do to kind of figure out how things are going to shake out. And this is where we get a lot of questions from students who are on wait lists saying, when are things going to happen and how many people are you going to take on? It's so unpredictable every year anyway. And this year it's even more unpredictable. So, on
that note around location, one tip that I have been giving students as they write updates, if they are really interested in a school that's far from where they live and they have a support network there, if their partner is going to that grad school, if they have extended relatives in the area to really just kind of point that out as a way to help the school understand that it's not just a geographic randomness that might bring them to that school, but that they really do have that network.
Good point. Yeah, there's some connection there to that area. That's a great point. Kate, when do you tell students that they shouldn't send a letter?
Sure. So if a school says, don't send us anything, then maybe follow the instructions that they are giving you, because one of the things that med schools are looking for is that level of professionalism, being able to follow instructions. If you can't tell whether they are willing to accept a letter, because some schools do say, only send things after you've been interviewed or only send things at certain points. If it's unclear from their website and communication, if you've read through everything and you can't find the answer, just give a call or send an email. I think calling is better because then you're not waiting on an email forever. Just call and say, I interviewed on X date. I'd really love to share my enthusiasm about the school and give you some updates on my candidacy. Am I allowed to send an additional update letter? And then ask how to do that. Yeah. So if a school tells you don't do it, don't do it. If you have nothing new to say, if you feel like you said everything you could say about yourself, your interests, what you've been doing, don't send one. And if you just sent an update recently, or if you just interviewed last week, it's probably too soon. You really have to judge that line between overly eager and stalkerish behavior and being appropriate and professional but enthusiastic. So it's a tough line. And that's where an advisor can sometimes be a helpful resource to kind of gauge what you've been doing in terms of communication with the school.
Yeah, kind of bounce that off of them. That is one question I ask every admissions person that I interview is, okay, if I'm on the wait list, do you want to hear from me? And almost every medical school, if I remember correctly, has said, yeah, we don't mind. Yeah, send us updates and stuff. But I think there's been one or two that's like, nope, we have a process. We have plenty of information about you. We have your interview feedback. We're good. So we'll don't call us, we'll call you, kind of thing. So, but most med schools tend to take them. But again, like Kate said, check and see. And if it's not clear, reach out to the admissions office and find out what the protocol is. All right. So we've gotten the green light from you to submit a letter, an update letter. What do you tell your students goes into it? What's the content?
Sure. So I say it's to show that you're continue to be interested in that school. So often you'll start with just a little intro. I'd like to show my continued interest and give you some updates on my candidacy. And then you'll share what you've been doing this year. So, and if you've had new jobs or new activities in your time since your interview, if you've won an award, if you have a publication, if you just anything that you have been doing, especially thinking about areas that you might have known were a weakness as you applied. So if you know, and in the pandemic, almost everyone could have had more clinical experience when they applied than they were able to have. And so if you are now vaccinated and your local hospital is allowing you to volunteer and you picked up a shift, maybe you talk a little bit about that and how you continue to build that patient-facing experience, bedside manner. And the more that you can connect what you're doing to that specific school's mission or goals or values, the better. So it's not just talking about what you've been doing, but also giving the school a sense of why you think that they should care that you've been doing it. So my kind of simple example, if you've started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, you might connect insights from that experience to your interest in working at the student-run free clinic for underinsured patients at the medical school. So really trying to make the connections clear between why the activities you've been doing have made you an even better fit for the school that you're writing to. Also, if you've gained new perspective on the school by doing more online research or talking to alums or other folks who are affiliated with the school or going to another info session, following the Twitter account, whatever it is, if you've learned something new about the school that makes you more excited about attending, then you could include that in your update as well.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. That last point there about other ways you've connected with them. Just be honest with the medical schools. Tell us like what you've been. I mean, like you said, follow me on social media, or I went to the virtual fair thing that you were hosting, or that was hosted by the AAMC, and I stopped in and that kind of stuff. So it does resonate with us when we're reading those things. Okay, so when students are in this position, I get it. For some, it's a desperate time. But you don't want to go on and on. What kind of length do you recommend students keep their letters to?
Sure. I often ask the student to step into an admission officer's shoes, thinking about how many applicants there still are in the pool, how many folks are working in admissions. There aren't unlimited resources to read the 10-page letter that you would love to send. So really being sensitive to your reader's time, trying to keep your letter meaningful and succinct. My rule of thumb, if students really want just like the answer, is to try to keep it to 1-page, single-spaced, normal-sized font, not like 8 points and no margins, but just, something that they can read, take in fairly quickly, understand because it's clearly written. So about a page.
Yeah. I think sometimes applicants are surprised to hear the size of admissions offices in medical school. Like most med schools are kind of bare bones staff, whereas undergrad admissions offices have people. They have teams of people and regions, and so they're much larger. That was your initial exposure, maybe to an admissions office, but now at a med school level, it's a much smaller operation. So you're right that the time value there for us in reading these is pretty high. So okay, so we've gone through these kind of steps here. Now I have my letter. And I read it's like I've dotted my I's, I've crossed my T's, and my grammar's great and saying all the right things. When you tell your advisors how to submit it, like where do they go? How do they email it? What kind of options?
Hopefully the school has been clear because I've gotten this question many times over many years as far as how you should submit. It's often through the online portal where you submitted your secondary application. If you can't figure out what the school's instructions are, again, it's fine to contact the admissions office and ask how you can submit this update. I think that it's helpful, especially if you've developed a relationship with your pre-health advisor, to also send a copy to them. So that's kind of a little side tip. It's helpful for us to know where you're really interested in attending, what you've been communicating with the school. So if the school is in touch with me about an applicant, I have some of their talking points in my mind as I'm chatting with the admissions folks from that school. Yeah,
good tip. And to build on that, if you're unsure how to submit it, and if there's a portal that you can update or upload a letter or document, then go ahead and do that. But then maybe email the admissions office and attach it and say, hey, I just want to let you know, wasn't quite sure how to submit an update letter, but I did. I uploaded it to my portal, and here's a copy of it as well. Just want to, bring in the loop in case you don't see it. And just a short, 4 or 5 sentence email is all it really takes to kind of bring it up on the radar. And to your point about sharing that letter, if you have an advisor, because from every once in a while we hear medical school admissions, we hear from advisors or we reach out to you and just say, hey, can you tell us a little more about, this applicant? And if you're looped in, then it's very helpful. So our conversation, we're all on the same page about the interest level, or if there's any questions about what they've been doing or if like what they've been up to and stuff like that. So that's a great tip to loop in your advisor if you have one. Okay. Any other advice on the update letter before we get into interest versus intent?
One other thing that some of my applicants do is reach out to an alum or recent student who is a first year, second year at the medical school where they're going to send that update. We have a lot of really generous alums who are happy to chat with students. So some of them are willing to read over that update and make sure that it sounds like, it fits for the school and what that school values and cares about. So if you happen to have access to alums, and you can always use LinkedIn for your undergrad school and see if there are any current students at that school, if you're not sure. But I'm a big fan of just gaining an insight from someone who is on the campus.
Yeah, I think I got ahead of myself because I wanted to ask you before we get into the difference between letters of interest and letters of intent. The other question I think usually that you get is, should I submit an additional letter of recommendation? Do you get those kind of questions? And if so, how do you advise students?
Yeah, I think that's another thing that, when you're feeling like there's nothing left to do, that maybe another letter of recommendation would give not just your own insight on what you've been doing, but someone else's insight on how you've continued to develop yourself personally, professionally, et cetera. So depending on the school and if they're willing to take another letter of recommendation, it is sometimes appropriate to have one sent. I always say, don't choose, your high school guidance counselor, your first year writing some professor, choose someone from this year. So it is a more recent update on what you have been up to since you applied. The more that it can be specific to your your story. So if you're really an applicant who talks a lot about your commitment to service to the underserved, maybe it is that volunteer coordinator at the soup kitchen where you've been working for a while, because that's going to connect more to who you're trying to kind of develop yourself as a future physician working with this population. So that's going to be just a nice narrative fit. Ideally a professional reference and not just a character reference, and not just someone who knows you but hasn't worked with you. Those letters tend to have a little bit more pull just because it is that professional relationship that you're building from.
I think sometimes there's a perception too in applicants that I need to find somebody who maybe is an alumnus, has a connection to the school, and try to get them to write me a letter because I'm dying to go there. What do you think about that?
If it's someone, again, who you have a professional relationship with, if you've been working as a research assistant at an affiliated teaching hospital, that might be a good person to write a letter because they can speak a little bit more about your personality, your work ethic, who you are professionally, how they can see you as a fit for that school because they attended that school or worked for that school. But if it's a friend of a friend who you had one phone conversation with that one time, that letter isn't going to be as convincing if they're sending a letter of recommendation. So in those cases, I often recommend that the applicant just fold in some of those insights from the conversation within their update. That can show an applicant's just enthusiasm, willingness to reach out and learn more from a current student. And it can just give a little bit more meat to their update, but I don't think that's necessarily a place where you want an official letter of recommendation.
You're absolutely right, Kate, because I've seen some of these letters that come from alumni, and they say, well, I had a nice conversation with this young man and they seem like a really, fine student. And I think they'd fit in great at your school. And you can tell it was just I got connected through somebody and we had coffee or something together. It was one time. But to your point, I think that's, instead of asking that person to write a letter, sending an update letter and saying, hey, I happened to meet one of your alumni and boy, we really hit it off and I learned more about the school and the values. I think that, like to your point, has more weight than asking somebody to write a letter from, that's just, they met one time. But interestingly enough, though, this morning or overnight, we got an email from one of our recent graduates about 4 or 5 years ago. And he lives in Los Angeles and he said, hey, I want to tell you about somebody that I met. Yeah, I'm getting my MPH now at USC. And one of the students in my class is also on your wait list. They found out that I'm a physician and I went to Case Western. And so she started chatting me up about it because she's really interested in it. And so it was an unsolicited
if
email.
It's organic like that, that's going to feel a lot different than if it feels like you've been kind of asked, wheedled into writing something more official.
Yeah. Your time's better spent crafting that update letter with that information in there. And also too, if you're going to send an additional letter of recommendation, you need to find out from the admissions office how they'll accept letters of recommendation, because those have some confidentiality parameters wrapped around them. And so oftentimes, we need to find out, do you want the letter writer to email it directly to your office or use the AMCAS letter service upload process so that admissions offices know that the applicant hasn't actually read this letter? That's more confidential kind of thing. So there are some nuances there when it comes to that.
Another tip for that AMCAS letter writer service, if a writer does upload a letter on your behalf into that portal, it helps to let the admissions office know that letter has come in. I don't think you all receive a signal that a new letter has come in for someone. So if someone submitted a letter for you as an applicant, make sure you let the admission office know to go get that letter. That's
exactly right. Because you can add letters and that's not something we get an email about as an update saying somebody has added an additional letter. Okay, so let's get into the topic of there are letters of interest versus letters of intent. How do you describe those differences to your advisees?
With a letter of interest, this is kind of the same as these updates that you can send throughout the process. You're talking about your continued activities, your continued interest in the school, how those intersect. A letter of intent is something that you send to one school saying in whatever wording is specific to you and how you want to word it. But if I am accepted to your school, I will commit to enroll. I will withdraw my candidacy from all other schools where I'm still under consideration. I'm saying that you are my top school and that I would absolutely come if I was accepted. So you can write a very enthusiastic letter of interest where you do not make this promise, I will drop off the radar from every other school. Mm-hmm. And a letter of interest that has that level of authenticity and specificity is probably going to pull a lot more weight than a letter that's very short and generic, but also says, you're my top school and I would come if you accept me. Mm-hmm. So, but generally a letter of intent is the one that is making that promise.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I do realize that for some applicants, we're getting into desperate times and you feel like, well, I need to expand my chances. I'm going to send out 4 letters of intent to the 4 schools that I interviewed at. And there's that, you got to be honest. It has to be genuine. And because when we see those kind of letter of intent, it kind of jumps off at the page to us. And so we hope that you're being honest and upfront with us when you're putting that out there. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's part of your professionalism, your code of ethics as a future physician. If you're going to make a promise to someone, you want that promise to be genuine and real. And I absolutely tell my applicants that. And if admissions is a small world, it's not unusual for a school's admission officer to be having coffee with another admissions officer on Zoom or whatever. Yeah. And you don't want necessarily your name coming up in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And you don't, it's just, there's a karmic something to me where if you're going to make a promise, keep that promise.
Right.
Again, you can write that really enthusiastic, I would love to come to your school. I know that I would thrive there. I know that I would really enhance the student community in these ways without saying I will absolutely commit. And I think it's a lot to say that you're going to commit before you know your financial aid package, before you might know other acceptances from other wait lists. And if you do take the time and really think through all the possibilities and you're absolutely sure that this is your school and have good reasons, sure, go ahead and send that letter of intent. But it's okay, and admissions offices will understand if you don't feel like you can make that promise yet. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that some of the letters that have resonated the most with us, those letters of intent, are the ones where students have said, I'm only writing one of these. And so they just kind of make it clear to us that this is a very thoughtful piece of literature I'm putting down in front of you. I really thought this through and I'm really putting my time into it. Maybe, and even those letters of interest, sometimes the students go back and they talk about their experience from the interview day and kind of talk about how that resonated with them. And then what's kind of happened since then that's led them to say, hey, I want to let you know I'm still out here. I'm still really interested. Keep me in mind as you get into your next part of your season. So what about any other tips or thoughts on letters of interest or letters of intent?
Really just be genuine to yourself. Really try to think through who you want to be. What's your future vision for yourself as a physician, and why would this school be the best place to help you get there? That's really what you're trying to convey, especially in the letter of intent. Again, talking to alums of the school so that you do. Everyone knows classmates or others who have gotten in off of wait lists and might have good advice or might just have advice. So also making sure that you are taking all of that advice with a grain of salt. What worked for one person doesn't necessarily work for every person. You have to also be yourself in this process. And at the end of the day, we all hope that it works out. Advisors, admissions folks, everyone just wants to make the best positions that we can. And we know that that's partly getting you all to the places where you're going to thrive. Yeah. And so the more that you can help us understand what it is about this one school that is the school for you, the better that we can kind of help rally the troops, hopefully get it to happen. Yeah.
Kate, this has been really helpful. I'm really glad that you've been willing to join me this morning. I kind of want short notice too, so I'm glad this all worked out. So hey, let's do this again sometime. We'll find another topic and we'll dive into it again. But thanks so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
That was great. It was a lot of fun, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you around. Thanks, Kate. See ya.